Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new, my name is Amy. I'm a mum of 2 boys and also love reading, so this channel is a bit of a mishmash of the two together. If you want to see videos about motherhood and about reading as well, then please stick around and subscribe, or if you like this video, please leave it a like. So today's video is going to be my January wrap up and February TBR. So without further ado, shall we jump in? So let's go through my reading stats for January. So I use the app Storygraph. I think it's really interesting. It gives you obviously lots of different graphs of everything about the books you've read that month, like genres, your average rating, what types of books you read, everything like that. So I find it really useful to see what my reading stats are. I do use Goodreads as well, but that's more to just track my reading and my TBR. So if you want a breakdown of all the books that you read in a month or over the course of the year, then get Storygraph. So in January I read 6 books totaling 2,329 pages, which I think is pretty good going. Technically I want to say it's 5.5 books because I did start one book in December and I finished it in January, but I did read the vast majority of it in January, so I'm going to count it in this. So yeah, 2,329 pages. Moods were emotional, mysterious, sad, informative, adventurous, dark and reflective. That's a lot of different ones, but I did read quite a few emotional books. I do tend to read more of the darker genres and darker storylines, so that doesn't surprise me at all. So pace, I had 1 slow paced book and 5 medium paced books. In terms of pages, I had 1 book that was less than 300 pages and 5 books that were between 300 and 499 pages. And I read 1 non-fiction and 5 fiction. So genres, now the only thing I don't like about Storygraph is that it doesn't collate the genres into one, so it's going to seem like I've read loads and loads of books, but they've put the same books under different genres and it's just listed all the genres that I've read separately. I read 4 fantasy, 3 historical, 2 literary, 1 YA, 1 true crime, 1 science fiction, 1 science, 1 history and 1 biography, and my average rating was 4.46 stars, which I think is pretty dang good. I had a fantastic reading month in January, but I have a feeling it's going to get a bit harder because I am a mum of 2 children, so it's going to be a bit harder when my son is off on school holidays. Those might be the times when my reading is a little bit slower than normal, but we'll just have to see. So let's go through all the books that I read in January. Now, none of these, very useful I know, are physical copies. I lent all of these books from the library, but I did physically read them. I had no audiobooks, no Kindle or anything like that. So let's jump right in. So the first 2 books I'm going to talk about as a collective because they are books 2 and 3 in a trilogy, and they are Girl in the Tower and Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden, and these are books 2 and 3 in the Winter Night trilogy, the first being The Bear and the Nightingale. I rated both of these 4 stars, and I found that I was getting distracted as I was reading them, especially in the second one, because the first book, The Bear and the Nightingale, focuses on Vasya, who is the main character in the story, and the first book is more about character development, and in the second book, because it's set in Russia, the second book is more about a political standpoint, and I found myself getting quite lost sometimes and like my mind wandering off. But when it got to the parts with Vasya and her character development, I was really intrigued. And in the third book, that was just the biggest revenge plot, and it's all about Vasya. So in the first book, I'll just give a quick rundown of the first book. So in The Bear and the Nightingale, there are lots of mini gods from Russian folklore, and Vasya, or Vasilia, as she is, Vasilia is her full name, Vasya is her nickname. She can see these gods when other people can't. So other people thinks that she's possessed basically, and she is in correspondence with the devil, and then this Catholic priest basically wants to get her tried as a witch, but this priest is attracted to her and he thinks that that's her fault and not his lust, basically. So it focuses on that and her finding out she can see these gods and communicating with these gods. The second book is more about political standpoints, and then the third book is basically Vasilia biting back and her comeback story, basically. So 4 stars for both of those. I know that was a very, very mishmash explanation, but you do have to read the books to kind of understand, and because it's a trilogy as well, it's hard to kind of sum up the trilogy. But you're following Vasilia, she can speak to these gods, and it's basically about prejudice in her life, basically, and how she experiences prejudice because she's 1, a woman, 2, considered not a very attractive woman, and 3, she can speak to and see these mini gods, basically. So it doesn't bode well for her, and it's pretty much just about prejudice and being treated differently because she is a woman who doesn't want to get married, doesn't want to join a convent, and it's about her just going through her life breaking the rules. And I think it's a very, very common trope, I think, but it's a trope that I do enjoy, and I did really enjoy this trilogy overall. So books 1 and 2 were Girl in the Tower and Winter of the Witch. The third book that I read in January was Echo North by Joanna Ruth Meyer. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely adored this book. So the main character, Echo, she is mauled and attacked by a white wolf when she was a little girl, and it's left her scarred and disfigured, and she's basically shunned and humiliated by her entire town, prejudiced by her entire town, apart from her father and her brother. They are thick as thieves, they do everything together, they do not judge her, they don't shun her for the way she looks, and her father goes on a trip and says, I'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. He's gone for an extended period of time, and then that time elapses and her father hasn't come back, so she decides to go out and look for him, and she finds him freezing to death in a forest. And in the forest she comes face to face with the wolf that attacked her as a little girl, and the wolf says to her, you can save your father, but in return I want you to come and live with me for an entire year. And she accepts to save her father, and they develop this bond and relationship, and in this enchanted house she ends up meeting a man called Hal, because there are lots of mirrors in this house and you can transport yourself to different stories through these mirrors, and in every single story she meets a man called Hal and they develop a relationship as well, and there's lots of twists and turns. This gave me major Beauty and the Beast vibes. I absolutely adored it. Like, you could speak to the house and it would take you to a different room, it would show you different rooms of the house, you could ask the house to make something for you and it'd make it. Major Beauty and the Beast vibes, and I absolutely adored it. It was my first 5-star read of the year. Next is my first non-fiction book of the year. I always get so confused between fiction and non-fiction, but my first non-fiction read of the year, and that was The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. Now, I do love true crime books. It is one of my biggest interests, is true crime and reading about these crimes and seeing things from different people's points of view, especially from crimes that have happened a long, long time ago, such as the Whitechapel murders from Jack the Ripper in 1888. And this is basically an ode to those women, because they were perceived as something they were not. They were perceived as women of the night, and most of them weren't. It was just because they were simply destitute and they were a woman, and they had nobody else to rely on, because a lot of them had very tragic pasts, and they were in Whitechapel in destitution because of no fault of their own, simply because they were a woman. And the skills that women had would get you pennies, whereas the skills a man had would get him a fairly decent wage to support his family. And it was very eye-opening seeing that not all the facts were correct, because journalists had to make money. It's very much the same as it is today. Some information is fabricated or exaggerated to sell their newspapers, and just seeing how tragic the lives of these women were was very eye-opening, very reflective, and it did make me rethink everything I knew about the Jack the Ripper case. I gave this book 3.5 stars. Now, I have realised that I am a fiction girl through and through. I don't really like reading non-fiction, but because it's a true crime book, it did interest me, it did pique my interest, but because of it being a non-fiction, it was very slow-paced. I found that it dragged on at times, and the chapters were very long in this book, and I was like flicking through the pages, seeing how many pages I had left until the chapter ended. So that was the only reason why I gave it 3.5 stars. It was still a very informative read, and it was a read that I enjoyed in some parts, but there were other parts where I did feel like it dragged a little bit. But it's a historical non-fiction, so it probably is going to, if it's going to give you the actual facts, and it goes through all of the facts. So 3.5 stars for that one. Next was a 4.5 star read, and that was In the Night Wood by Dale Bailey. Now, this is quite a short book. It is less than 300 pages. The only reason I gave it 4.5 stars is, for some reason, there were some parts of the book that I didn't feel were needed. It focused so much on Erin, who is a character I'll go into in a minute. It's focused so much on her just diving deep into her depression, and it went a bit too far in some cases, in my personal opinion. But at the start of the book, we follow Charles, who as a child discovers a book in his family library called In the Night Wood by a very famous author who I cannot remember the name of. But he keeps the book, and it's just tucked away in a box for a while, but then he rediscovers it just as he's about to go to college, and he decides to study it intensively while he's at college. So he ends up going into the college library to see if he can, and the college archives, to see if he can find anything on this author, and he bumps into a woman. He literally bumps into a woman and almost falls over, and that ends up being his future wife Erin, who is a descendant of said author. And the book opens with that, but then it cuts forward to them driving to Hollowwood Hall, I believe it's called. Just let me double check that. So they moved to Hollowwood Estate after the death of their daughter. She died in a tragic accident that is believed to be, well, Charles believes it's his fault, and Erin does as well. And it's all about them getting away and starting fresh after the death of their daughter. And once they get into the house, very strange things start happening that mirror a lot of the things in the book. And it's a very, I would say kind of paranormal, but not really, like fairy tale folklore type paranormal, where characters in the book start showing up in the forest around the estate, and certain characters from said fairy tale seemingly influencing what Erin and Charles do. But it was a very touching read, and it's basically about finding yourself after such a tragedy, and you know, that burying yourself in drugs and drink and alcohol and just hiding away after such a tragic accident isn't always the answer. However down and just devastated you feel, and it has a lot of different messages in that book, which is why I enjoyed it so much. I gave it 4.5 stars, and it was very reflective. I've, like, having gone through grief and depression in my own life, it was a very reflective read on coping mechanisms and saving your relationships after something so tragic. So if you want something that involves fairy tales but has more depth to it and focuses on other themes, rather dark themes other than just the fairy tale itself, then give this a read. My last book of January, and this was my second 5-star read of the year, was Hester by Laurie Lico Albanese. I adored this book, absolutely adored it. It's very different to kind of the witchy books I've read before, and I am big into books about witchcraft and like witch trials and everything like that. It's one of my favourite tropes, is about like witch hunts, witch trials. So we follow Isabel and Edward, and they have emigrated to Salem from Glasgow after being made destitute because of Edward's bad dealings with some other business partners. So they are sent to a workhouse. Isabel's father ends up bailing them out and says, "This is all the money that you have left, go to America." And Isabel has something called synesthesia, which is where she can basically see colours based on words and sounds and associate colours with different words and different people. And it's just a very cool element that I've never heard of before in a book. It's never been in a book I've read before. And her mother and her aunt, I believe, have taught her how to sew and embroider, and she decides to use her synesthesia in her work. And her mother basically said, "No, you absolutely cannot do that. You will be tried as a witch," because Isabel's ancestor was tried as a witch in Glasgow, but she managed to escape, hence why Isabel is around and her mother is around, etc. So they end up moving to Salem, and on the way to Salem they end up helping the captain, who says that he is forever in their debt because Isabel saved his life. And Edward ends up going with the captain on a trip to Bermuda because he is a doctor, and the captain basically wants his help. So Isabel is left by herself. She's given a room to sleep in, and this room, this little cottage actually, is on the same kind of estate as a black couple. And at the time, this was after the witch trials, this was 1800s Salem, so after emancipation, after slavery, and there's a lot of prejudice in this book. I think that is one of the main themes of this book, is people dealing with prejudice and how people are treated differently just because of the colour of their skin, or they have different skills, or they have something like synesthesia where, you know, it might be seen as a skill from witchcraft or the occult, but it's just something that, you know, it's not common, but it's something that's a lot more talked about nowadays, things like synesthesia. And yeah, it was a very eye-opening read. And while Edward is away, Isabel meets Nathaniel. Now Nathaniel, they end up falling for each other, basically, even though Isabel is still married to Edward. And Nathaniel is a descendant of a Salem witch trial judge. So that puts that relationship, even if it was platonic, that would kind of put things on the rocks to start with. Yeah, that relationship does develop all throughout the book and ends on a bit of a boom moment, and it just had the perfect amount of everything. It had suspense, it had romance, it had not action, but there's a bit of violence in there, and there are some things in this book that I would definitely say need trigger warnings. I won't go into them, but I will put a trigger warning on this book. So yeah, that was my second 5-star read of the year, and I absolutely loved it. So let's go through my February TBR. Now I'm aiming for 5 books a month, which I think is pretty decent, and I've already read one, which I'll obviously go through in my next monthly wrap up. So I've got 4 books here that I want to read in February, and one of them I'm not halfway through yet. I'd probably say I'm about 35%, 40% of the way through it. So let's go through my February TBR. So this is the book that I'm currently reading, and it is The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. I am enjoying this book and I'm not at the same time. There's just something about the writing that I'm finding a bit bland, but the plot is keeping me going through the book. So this book is following Anne, who has left home and has come to New York City to find work, basically. And she's supposed to be working at the Metropolitan in New York. And when she gets there, they basically say, sorry, all the positions have been filled. We've had to sacrifice some positions and yours is one of them. But then a man comes along called Patrick. I believe it's Patrick. Yes, Patrick Rowland, who is the museum's curator. And he is in charge of the Cloisters, which is another part of the city. And he is basically obsessed with divination and tarot. And he asks Anne to be a secondary researcher alongside his other colleague Rachel, and she ends up having a bit of a crush on Patrick, even though he's quite a bit older than her. And then she ends up meeting the gardener of the exhibit called Leo, and she ends up falling for him as well. That's where I'm currently up to, and they seem to have this weird friendship relationship thing going on, and Rachel just seems a bit off as well. Like, she's acting very buddy with Anne and acting like her best friend, even though they've barely known each other for very long. But Anne is eating that up because she comes from a very small town, and her father has passed away, and her mum has basically gone into a deep depression, and she doesn't really have anyone, so she is eating it up. So we'll see how this goes. Let me read the synopsis for you. When Anne Stillwell arrives in New York, she hopes to spend the summer working at the city's Metropolitan Museum of Art. Instead, she is assigned to the Cloisters, the Met's Gothic museum and garden renowned for its medieval and Renaissance collections. There she is drawn into a small circle of charismatic but enigmatic researchers, each with their own secrets and desires, including the museum's curator Patrick Rowland, whose obsession is tarot and the possibility of divination. Eager for the approval of her new colleagues, Anne is only too happy to indulge some of their more outlandish theories. But then she discovers a mysterious, once-believed lost deck of 15th century Italian tarot cards, and finds herself at the centre of a dangerous game of toxic friendship and unbridled ambition. And as the game, being played within the Cloisters, begins to spiral out of control, Anne must decide whether she is truly able to defy the cards and shape her own future. That does sound pretty good, but I am finding it a bit of a slow burn at times, so we'll see how this goes and if I enjoy it. Next, I had to include another witchy book in here, and by the way, all of these books are from the library. I don't actually own these, so they will be going back to the library, and when I do my yearly wrap up, there will just be pictures of them on the screen. But the next one is another witchy book, and I'm quite excited to read this. The cover is just stunning, and it is Cunning Women by Elizabeth Lee. I'm not sure what this is about, so let me read the synopsis. They only want a kindness, but beware, for if you have no coin, they will curse you black and blue. Well, 1620 Lancashire. This book is already going to be close to my heart because I am from Cumbria, which is not that far away from Lancashire, and any books that have are set in the north are very near and dear to me. Away from the village lies a small hamlet abandoned since the plague, where only one family dwells amongst its ruins. Young Sarah Haworth, her mother, brother and little sister Annie are a family of outcasts by day and the recipients of visitors by night. They are cunning folk. The villagers will always rely upon them, quick with a healing balm or more should the need arise. They can keep secrets too because no one will believe them anyway. When Sarah spies a young man taming a wild horse, she risks being caught to watch him calm the animal. And when Daniel sees Sarah, he does not just see a strange, dirty thing, he sees her for who she really is. A strong creature about to come into her own. But can something as fragile as love blossom between these two in such a place as this? and when a new magistrate arrives to investigate the strange ends that keep befalling the villagers, he has his eye on one family alone and a torch in his hand. Oh my god! I need to read this. I'm so excited to read this. I'll probably read this after the cloisters maybe. I'm trying to do like fiction, non-fiction, fiction, non-fiction. We'll have to see, because I've only got 2 non-fictions in my TBR and one of them I've already read. So I might read this after I've read the cloisters. So next is another non-fiction, and I'm quite excited to read this one. I think it's going to give me some new perspective on things. I have mentioned this before, and it is Past Mortems by Carla Valentine, Life and Death Behind Mortuary Doors. So this is all about death and misconceptions around death. So let me just read the synopsis. A day in the life of Carla Valentine, curator, pathology technician and the death professional, is not your average day. She spent 10 years training and working as an anatomical pathology technologist, where the mortuary slab was her desk and that day's corpse is her task list. Past Mortems tells Carla's stories of those years, as well as investigating the body alongside our attitudes towards death, shedding light on what the living can learn from the dead and the toll the work can take on the living souls who carry it out. Fascinating and insightful, Past Mortems reveals the truth about what happens when the mortuary door swings shut or the lid of the coffin closes. This is going to be quite an interesting read, I think. I'll have to see if I like it or not, but there's only one way to find out, and that is by reading it. And my last book on my February TBR is Wayward by Amelia Hart. I have seen lots of things about this, and I have read the synopsis very briefly, and it's 3 different timelines, and one of them, the modern day one, is set in Cumbria, which is where I'm from. So I think I'm going to enjoy this book. So let me read the synopsis. Kate 2019. Kate flees London, abandoning everything for Cumbria and Wayward Cottage, inherited from her great aunt. There, a secret lurks in the bones of the house, hidden ever since the witch hunts of the 17th century. Violet 1942. Violet is more interested in collecting insects and climbing trees than in becoming a proper young lady, until a chain of shocking events changes her life forever. Alpha 1619. Alpha is on trial for witchcraft, accused of killing a local man. Known for her uncanny connection with nature and animals, she is a threat that must be eliminated, but wayward women belong to the wild and they cannot be tamed. Oh, I'm gonna love this book, I think. I'm so excited. I'm very excited to get going in my February TBR. But yeah, my son has just woken up, which is probably right on cue for me to finish up this video. I hope you guys have really enjoyed. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more from me, don't forget to subscribe. Keep on reading, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.